Welcome to another Jabba's Palace roll call. Today's character, Yuzzum. You've just witnessed the only appearance of Yuzzum in Return of the Jedi. If you missed it, I'll turn up the brightness a little bit so you might be able to see it a little bit better. There he is to the left of Ula, there against the wall. Let's zoom in a little bit so we can see him just a little bit more clearly. You can see his antenna at the top of his head. He's got his spindly legs and his shoes, and he's kind of moving up and down as if he's enjoying the beat of the music. What we just saw was the original theatrical version, but if we look at the special edition, we actually get a much better look at his face. Did you catch that? This shot here, I think, is composited together and only exists in the special edition, but you can see Yuzzum's face sort of poking up from behind Jabba's throne right here. I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see it better. We also see Yuzzum in the same place that we saw him in the theatrical edition, but this shot has been cut short compared to the one that was in the original. So we only get to see his full body for a little more than a second. But if we actually want to see what Yuzzum looked like, we need to turn to some behind-the-scenes photography, like this particular photo with C-3PO, or this one where he's standing center stage, showing off his rifle. I think it's worth taking a second to actually look at his appearance here. He really does look a lot like a Muppet, which I think is pretty interesting. He doesn't quite seem like he fits in with a lot of the other creatures from Jabba's palace, though, to be honest. And then to have him carrying this gigantic gun is kind of a hilarious mismatch, in my opinion. This rifle is kind of a key element of this character in some ways, but if we go back and look at the scene that I just showed you from Jabba's palace, he's not holding the rifle, at least as far as I can tell. He seems to have his hands empty and just kind of hanging there. This documentary footage shows him being installed on a rod inserted into the wall of Jabba's palace. You can see from this behind-the-scenes footage that he actually had completely articulated joints, which makes it a little strange that he was relegated to being in the background and basically not moving. I think what they did was attach this pole to him and then just had someone behind the wall kind of jiggle it up and down a little bit to give him a little bit of movement. Of course, it wasn't unusual for them to spend a lot of time creating a very detailed creature and then only have him visible for a split second in the background of Jabba's palace. But the fact that they put so much effort into making sure that he was articulated and could be used as a full-on puppet is a little strange unless you know a little bit more about the creation of Yuzzum. If you check online sources, they pretty much all say that there were actually supposed to be two races on Endor, the Ewoks and the Yuzzum, who were going to work together to help the rebels defeat the Empire. To be honest with you, it's not entirely clear to me if that's actually true or whether they just used an old Ewok concept as a basis to make a Jabba's Palace alien. If they had intended the Yuzzums to be kind of a counterpart to the Ewoks on Endor, you would have thought that they would have made more than just one puppet of them. So if they did originally intend that, I think they changed their minds pretty early on in the production process. So yes, Yuzzum was actually the name of the race of creatures rather than the name of an individual, although we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Famously, the Ewoks on Endor were originally supposed to be Wookiees, but for whatever reason that turned out to be too difficult or expensive. The initial concept art for the Ewoks, such as these drawings from Joe Johnston, showed them as quite tall, with long legs, and honestly this is more like a cross between Yuzzum and an Ewok. This picture here really reminds me of the Landstrider from Dark Crystal. We do have some artwork here that's labeled Yuzzum. This is by Nilo-Rodis-Jamero. This guy right here is essentially exactly the same as the finished concept. As I said, I'm still not entirely sure whether they had intended this puppet to actually be used on Endor with the Ewoks, or whether it was essentially just created for Jabba's Palace based on the old concept art. Seems pretty clear to me that they didn't get very far with the concept of having the Yuzzums be on Endor with the Ewoks, because they only made one puppet. It's possible they were just using this as a sort of prototype to see how difficult it would be to use a puppet like this on Endor, and then when it turned out to not really be feasible, They stuck him in the background in Jabba's palace just to make it look a little bit more populated. Regardless of why they decided not to use him in the end, I do think the creation process for Yuzzum is pretty interesting to look at. If we look at this artwork here, which I mentioned a minute ago is made by Nilo-Rodis-Jamero, you can see that he has basically all of the elements of the final character concept, although he is rather taller looking. His legs are much longer. In fact, he was responsible for many of the iconic costume and character designs that they used in Return of the Jedi. He really had an insane amount of influence on how things ended up looking in the final film. If you're interested in how he started working on Star Wars with George Lucas and some of his experiences in creating these films, he appeared twice on the Filmumentaries podcast. I found it really fascinating, and although he doesn't mention Yuzzum specifically, as far as I can recall, if you're a fan of this kind of behind-the-scenes info, I think you'd really enjoy listening to it. Anyway, after he made the initial sketch, it was turned into a 3D maquette by Judy Elkins. You may remember Ms. Elkins from my video about Yak Face, because she was the one who sculpted both the maquette and the full-sized costume for Yak Face. She talked a bit about the creation of Yuzzum in an interview with Regal Robot's Tom Spina, so why don't we go ahead and listen to a portion of that.
So yeah, talk a little about him. Where did that come from?
That was a drawing, and I really, to be honest, I really kind of didn't get the proportions right. It was supposed to have been they were supposed to have been 7 feet tall, and with a little ball of fur on long legs. And I didn't quite get that with the model, but that was sent over, and it did get approved.
Yeah.
I made the little gun thing. That was kind of fun.
Yeah.
Would go to the model shop a lot of times and get little greebles and things.
I was just going to say, you're raiding their Greebly box and just.
So they showed me how to do those things. And that just sculpted him and put the fur on him. It took a long time to put the fur on because I was kind of in there with tweezers and glue and tweezers and cutting the fur off of probably a fake fur. I did not make the full size. That was, I think, Dan Howard, made the full size.
Poor Yuzzum might not have had very long in the limelight, but he did appear on some vintage merchandise, including this Jabba the Hutt throne room action scene by MPC. It's a plastic model kit that snaps together, and it came out in 1983 and was released again in the 90s by AMT Ertl. The quality of plastic models in the 80s was not stellar, but it is pretty cool at least that they had a lot of obscure characters from the palace, including, if you look in the middle here, Yuzzum.
There he is, so you can see they actually did a halfway decent job of sculpting him, but even in person, it is pretty difficult to see the details. So, But this would have been the very first, and actually only, physical representation of quote-unquote Yuzzum until very recently, which we'll be talking about soon.
He was also featured in this version of the Star Wars Return of the Jedi coloring book by Kenner. This is the one with Luke on the cover. And you can see he's got a whole page to himself. They even put his name there in the bottom left. But it's pretty funny, even though there's no real indication of scale on the page that he's on. He looks gigantic when you see the droids and so forth on the facing page there. And I'm not even sure that Kenner knew how big Yuzzum was actually supposed to be. By the way, a viewer sent in this photo of this page that they had colored, and it's always really cool to see that. Yuzzum also appeared in the Play for Power card games by Parker Brothers. This is also from 1983, and it featured cards with nice paintings of various characters from Jabba's palace, including Yuzzum right there. Very nice portrait of him there, I'll have to say. They really captured his eyes. He also appeared on a playing card. This was made by Cartamundi around 2007. He also appeared on a card in this Jabba's Palace expansion from the Star Wars customizable card game released by Decipher in the late 90s. I originally thought, before I started making this video, that the card would be under the name Wham Luffba instead of Yuzzum. Wham Luffba is kind of the modern, in-universe name that they've given the character from Jabba's Palace. But actually, the name, as you can see on the card, is Yuzzum, and the name Wham Luffba was a later invention. As far as I can tell, the first appearance of the name Wam Lufba actually was on this entry on StarWars.com's databank. There was a fairly detailed story written by Tim Veekhoven talking about how Wam Lufba ended up in Jabba's palace. I actually had to go to the Wayback Machine to find this article. It's no longer available on the StarWars.com website. This particular snapshot is from April of 2006. It tells the story of how Wam Lufba was captured from Endor and then taken to Jabba's palace, where he managed to show his skill with a rifle. So they managed to work in the rifle there, and he became kind of a skilled rodent hunter there in the palace, which is an interesting backstory. I'm probably overlooking something here, but the only thing I could find in terms of merchandise that had Wam Lufba on it was this card from Germany, actually. He was a kind of playable character in the Star Wars Force Attacks card game. By the way, I thought I would mention this since I've seen some confusion online. This is Yuzzum, spelled this way, while this race of aliens from Ragna 3 was called Yuzzum. Not really sure what they were thinking there, but it's worth being aware of. Now you may be saying to yourself, hey, I remember there being another Yuzzum in Jabba's palace, and yes there was, although only in the special edition of the film. They made a fully CGI version of a Yuzzum named Joe Yowza, who was sort of the male lead singer of the expanded Max Rebo band. It's no secret that I am not a huge fan of the changes made to the Max Rebo band sequence here. They changed the song, added new band members, and added some kind of questionable looking CGI. Joe Yowza is definitely an example of that, although maybe he's not quite as bad as Cy Snoodles, if only because he doesn't replace an existing and beloved character the way they did with her. I don't really have any inside information about the creation of Joe Yowza, unfortunately, but it seems fairly obvious that they went through the characters from Jabba's palace and settled on Yuzzum as one that was underutilized, which is definitely true, and decided to make him into a singer-type character modeled pretty closely after Joe Cocker in terms of his appearance and mannerisms. Like Wam Lufba, Joe Yowza also has an entry in the databank on StarWars.com, which is no longer there anymore, but you can view it on the Wayback Machine. Basically, Joe was on Endor and wandered into a freighter looking for food, and the captain kind of adopted him, and then later on he happened to be where the Max Rebo band was playing and started singing along, and they decided that they would like him to join the group. Doesn't really get a lot more deep than that, but still kind of interesting. I found a couple other interesting tidbits when I was researching Joe Yowza. The Wikipedia entry for him has this as his actual full name, which I won't even try to pronounce. I was also pretty amused by this sentence in his Wikipedia entry. It says, among Jabba's courtiers, there were many people who disliked Yowza's voice and dreamed of silencing him brutally. I feel like I can identify somehow. They did make a little bit of merchandise for Joe Yowza, including one card for Decipher's card game, and Kenner also created action figures of these CGI characters in the form of these Power of the Force Max Rebo Band pairs. These were released in 1998 and then re-released in 2007 as a Walmart exclusive in slightly different packaging, but I think the figures themselves are identical.
And here is the Joe Yowza figure in person. Not my favorite figure for lots of reasons. I mean, the sculpting is fine, I guess, but he's kind of sculpted in a weird position, maybe, mid-song, I suppose, with his mouth open and kind of doing this Joe Cocker hand thing. I mean, it's okay, I guess. His legs, though, really don't have any meaningful articulation, but beyond that, they also don't have any holes in them, so you can't use a normal stand with him to help him stand up. And, depending on what you're putting him on, it can be a little tricky to get him to stand. I actually put some little white putty here to help him not fall over when he was in my display case. But yeah, now I do have one other thing. This is basically, as far as I can recall, the only version of Joe Yowza that's been released as a figure, but I do have a custom that I think you might want to see. allow me to present the Max Reborg Band. This is a set of custom figures that I got on eBay from the guy who made them many years ago, like 10 or 15 years ago, I guess. And I think they're brilliant. He took the key parts from the Star Wars figures, but then sort of grafted on a bunch of Borg parts from Star Trek figures and a bunch of kit bashed and scratch built stuff. He did an amazing job. In fact, he ended up making them taller by quite a bit. So you can see this is the original Joe Yowza figure, and the kit bashed one, the customized one, is a lot taller. But anyway, I just thought it would be fun to show these off. I did feature these in a video a number of years ago, but I have a feeling that a lot of people haven't seen them.
In addition to Joe Yowza, the Yuzzums have also appeared in more modern media, such as Star Wars Ewoks, the comic book. You can see them here alongside the Ewoks as perhaps they were originally intended to be. So that's about it for the Yuzzum characters in terms of merchandise, except for one thing, and if you've been watching this channel for a while, I think you know where I'm going with this. Regal Robot has come to the rescue once again. They are releasing their own version, their own replica of the original Maquette created by Judy Elkins. They were able to get me my copy a little bit early, so we're going to take a look at that right now.
So here is the actual Maquette itself, and I think it's very impressive on display. It's really quite large compared to many of the other maquettes that they've released, and of course it's an exception in that it's a full body figure instead of just a bust as many of the other ones are. To give you an idea of the size, here is the 3 3/4 inch scale Joe Yowza figure. You can see he's much smaller than Yuzzum here. You know, I often don't like actual hair or fur on this kind of collectible because, sometimes it's hard to get it to look right, but I think they did a fantastic job with this. I know that Tom Spina of Regal Robot is quite a fan of Muppets and, has, I think, quite a bit of knowledge about, like, what kind of hair this was, what kind of fake fur they used, that kind of thing. It looks really good. And especially, seen from a normal distance when it's on display, I think it looks fantastic. All right, here are the included parts. I think it's important to go over this because basically this is the only archive collection piece that I've gotten anyway that has any real assembly required, and it's also, just from looking at the parts, going to be one of the more fragile ones, so you do want to be a little bit careful when you're assembling it, follow the instructions and so forth. It comes with the body, the legs, a gun, base, and then a support rod that's made of metal. The pieces are connected with magnets, which is very nice. I always like it when places do that. And there's a magnet in the arm here, or the hand, that connects to this magnet in his rifle. And then there's also a magnet in the legs, as you can see here. Now, I have tentatively put this together, and I will say it's a little bit hard to get back apart if you put these two together. There's quite a strong magnet. That's a good thing, but just be aware of that. Once you put it together, you probably just want to leave it. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and show you how to assemble this according to the included instructions. Basically, they say you always have to use this support rod when you're displaying the figure. You don't want to have him up on his legs just as they are. And I think the reason for that is that these legs are quite spindly and thin, and this is on the heavier side. And if my experience making my Bomar Monk, my 3D printed Bomar Monk, is any indication, something with resin, made out of resin with thin legs is going to kind of bow under its own weight after a while. It might, in this case, I could see it kind of wilting in one direction or the other, and just this rod will take care of that. So not a huge deal, just something to be aware of. So anyway, the way to use this, it's a little hard to tell because of all this fur that we've got here, but there is a hole in here that you can insert it into. It's in the torso and not the legs. And that's to help, support this weight. I understand, my understanding is that you're supposed to connect the torso to the legs first, and you can kind of, smooth out his fur a little bit, and then stick this, brace yourself here, Yuzzum, up here, and then you put this into the wooden base. First the rod goes in, and then you're going to sort of maneuver the pegs on the bottom of his feet into these holes. There is a little bit of give in his legs, so you can kind of bend them just enough to get them to go into the holes. A little difficult to do this on camera, but there we go. And finally, you can take the rifle and, as I say, match up this magnet to the one that's in his hand, and it'll just sort of snap in there. And there we go. I think that's basically it. So we've got him ready to display. So this will be available in 2 editions, just like most of the Archive Collection maquettes have been recently. The first is the Signature Edition, which includes this maquette and a signature plaque that's signed by Judy Elkins, who sculpted the original maquette. That is going to be $4.99. But there's also going to be a very special Legacy Edition with dual signatures on it, which I don't think they've ever done before. So, I'll go ahead and show it to you right now. This is what you would get with the Legacy Edition. This has on the bottom a dual signature plaque with Nilo-Rodis-Jamero and Judy Elkins. Nilo-Rodis-Jamero, of course, did the original concept sketch for Yuzzum, and then Ms. Elkins did the actual sculpting. But in addition, you also get a unique piece of artwork from Nilo-Rodis-Jamero, and that's quite special to me anyway, because, as I said earlier in the video, his concepts for Return of the Jedi in particular were just so influential and really iconic stuff. So it's really cool to be able to get a piece of original artwork by him. I'll give you a closer look at what I got here for mine. This, as you can probably tell, it has Yuzzum here holding his rifle and has one foot or leg up on what appears to be a droid of some kind, I'm thinking. Looks like it might be a probe droid, perhaps. And, it's a fairly simple drawing, but it conveys a lot with just a few lines. I think it's really cool. I really like this artwork. I'm guessing maybe this is meant to portray Yuzzum as he was in his original concept, like on Endor, as opposed to being in Jabba's palace. But you can let me know what you think about that. But yeah, very, very cool. And here we have the dual signature plaque as well. This is going to be $7.99. The first one, the Signature Edition, is limited to just 83 pieces, and this Legacy Dual Signature Edition with the artwork is limited to only 40 pieces. So quite limited, and, let's be frank, it's not the most broadly appealing character in some ways, but I think he's really cool, and this is exactly the kind of stuff that I really love to collect. So I'm really happy that Regal Robot decided to make him, and it gives me a little bit of hope, too, that they may try some of the other characters that have full bodies, such as, Sice Noodles, for example. I wasn't sure if that was something they were going to tackle or not, if it was just going to be busts, but I think they may be up to it. I don't have any inside information or anything, but I'm hoping, fingers crossed. So anyway, I will be putting the link in the video description for more information about this. These will be available tomorrow as of this video being uploaded. So on the 25th of March at noon, these will go up for sale. That's about it for today. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you again soon.